The Young Man and the Sea. When I was about 10, my father and I went on a fishing trip to Florida Bay at the southern reach of the Everglades. We stayed in the modest fisherman's motel just west of the Flamingo Marina and spent the early mornings casting lures for snook back up in Coot Bay and Whitewater Bay. It was December and we weren't doing any good. One big one tried to grab my mirror lure right at the boat, but he missed it, and that was the only fish we had seen for days. One thing you do see at that time of year is giant tarpon in the distance jumping totally out of the water, arching into the sky, and plunging back down with a maximal, explosively scattering splash. Judging from the plaques underneath wall-mounted tarpon in various restaurants, those monsters weighed 150 to 200 pounds. We understood that the jumping had something to do with their mating behavior. We weren't fishing for those. We didn't have that kind of tackle and wouldn't have known how to use it or even wanted to use it. A 3-pound snook would have been fine with us. In the afternoons, I would wade up to my armpits along the sandy strip of shore in the direction of Cape Sable. I caught a fair number of 1-2-pound redfish with the distinctive black spot on the tail, using yellow bucktails. They were weak fighters, but any fish is interesting to a kid fishing in a place like that. That's the thing about fishing. You never know what it's going to be, and that includes nothing. Lots of times out there, the only fishing action would be by the flocks of skimmers popping tiny bait fish off the surface with their elongated lower mandibles. On one particular afternoon, I was wading and nothing was biting on the bigger lures, so I started fishing for jacks with a little silver spoon lure less than an inch long. I could see the jacks schooling in the shallows, and they even brushed past my bare legs, their silver sides flashing as they turned in the dim winter sun. And they were tapping my silver spoon pretty much every time I flipped it toward them. The spoon only had a single small hook, so I only landed 1 or 2 out of 20 that hit it. But I was releasing them back into the school, and it was fun. At one point, the wading became shallower, and I was able to walk at knee depth on a shallow bar. There was a shallow stretch of water between me and the main shore that looked like it was a foot or 2 deep at the deepest. And I could see a narrow connection to the main bay water about 20 feet ahead, so I figured that some of the jacks could have gotten in there, even though as a pool it really only amounted to a large puddle. But I would have thrown my spoon in there even if there was no connection to bigger water. I had long since learned that you can fish in water that can't possibly have any fish. Once I flipped a little surface lure I had carved into a shallow puddle in a dirt road near a farm pond, and got a strike from a 5-inch largemouth, which I actually landed. Apparently there had been a big flood recently, and that fish had swum over what later turned out to be dry land and got trapped in the puddle. Or an osprey dropped him in there. Or another kid caught him in the pond and dropped or released him in the puddle. Or he just leaped out of the lake and landed in the dirt and flipped himself over and started swimming when he could. You tell me how he got there. That's the whole point about fishing. You have no good idea ahead of time what you're going to catch or why. ever. You're out there to see what happens, often nothing. And you can provide your own account to explain it anytime you want. Every story is a fish story, even if there are no fish. By the way, I released that baby largemouth back into the big pond from his puddle, which would have soon dried up. So there are some higher moral elements to some of these stories. Anyway, before I could flip my spoon into this miniature estuary in the unlikely hopes of convincing a jack to surprise me, the surface of the pool coiled up like it was hit by some kind of earthquake or whirlpool, and one of those giant tarpon blasted out of the water and arched directly over me and plunged back into the deep water of the bay far out behind me, drenching me with buckets of seawater. The thing was gone instantly through the depths, though I could still see and hear and feel the substantial rippling waves from the impact. I can still see the bluish silver of that fish's shining, curving sides far above me, and I can feel its immense weight over me. The distance between exit and entrance had to be 25 feet. The height of the animal had to have been 10 to 12 feet. The animal was 3 times as big as I was. Maybe he used his tail to get extra purchase and propulsion off the shallow bottom of the puddle. It took quite a while for the suds and ripples in the inland pool to subside. I guessed that pool must have been deeper than it appeared, although those giants really are no more than a foot or 2 in diameter. I had an urge to step into the pool to check out how deep it actually was, but I was afraid I might step on another one of those monsters. Nor did I flip my silver lure into that pool for fear I would somehow snag such a fish. I would lose my tackle, if not be immediately beaten to death as a side effect of some kind of primal struggle. In fact, I decided that was enough fishing for that afternoon. Looking back, I think I felt I was literally over my head. It was time to go back to the room and see what was on TV, maybe get an orange knee-high out of the motel machine. I did not tell my father about that big tarpon. It's not that I was afraid he wouldn't believe me. It's that I thought he wouldn't let me fish out there anymore by myself. In fact, the truth is I never told him about that fish at all, even in later years. There never seemed to be a reason to. It's almost as if that fish didn't actually have anything to do with fishing, as if it was extraterrestrial, out of range, like a car wreck you see on a trip that doesn't really have anything to do with where you're going or what you're going to do there. I know there are people who seek out such fish, those monsters on the walls of fishing camps and tackle stores all over Florida, but I would never want to disturb such a being again, much less conquer it in some way. If indeed I did disturb it, maybe it never even saw me. When I later read Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea story about a 3-day and night pursuit of a giant hooked marlin that was too big to get into the boat and battling sharks by hand with knives and harpoons that were mutilating the giant trophy under a brutal sun, taking out chunks and ruining its value, and suffering from lack of food and water, and ending up with only a trophy skeleton at the end, that's not fishing. That's life. Fishing is imagination and dreaming, amazement and boredom and beauty and speculation, mystery and humor. It's big, but it has a scale to it. There are bounds, at least the way we did it, my father and me. My father and I talked a lot about fishing, but I never mentioned that fish. We never talked about life, and I'm glad about that.